So today we're going to take a look at how we punctuate adverbials. And what's different from our last unit, where we only learned 2 comma rules. Adverbials have the possibility of having a lot of comma rules. So what I'm going to try to do is break it down into some simple rules for you to be able to put onto your yellow notes and to then be able to apply. As always, I don't think it's important to memorize these, but just important to be able to recognize the structure you're working with and then say, okay, now I know what I'm working with. What's the rule that applies to this? So let's take a look at these 6 rules that I have. So the first rule that we have, it says, when we're dealing with something which is really short, so it says generally a short prepositional phrase or a short noun phrase or an adverb that introduces or begins the sentence usually isn't set off with a comma. The only exception that we're going to find is a really long prep phrase or a string of prep phrases. So if someone says, before school, I had to milk the family goats, you'll notice there's no comma after school. It's a short prepositional phrase. If I said, Saturday morning, we all pitched in and cleaned the garage, there's no comma after Saturday morning. It's a short noun phrase working as an adverb, which we call the adverbial objective. If I said, hastily, they gathered their books and left the room. Well, hastily is just an adverb which describes the verb, tells us how they gathered and how they left in a very hasty manner. So therefore, there's no comma. That's a misconception that a lot of people have. They think that the adverb takes the comma at the very beginning of the sentence, and it doesn't usually. As we're going to get to rule number 3, there's a few times where it will, but those are really, really weird words. The only time we're actually going to use the comma if it's a prepositional phrase or an adverbial objective or an adverb at the very beginning of the sentence is actually when it's a prep phrase, which is really, really long, or it's a string of prep phrases. So for example, if I said, upon their much anticipated arrival, the new Ruth Bader Ginsburg action figures were quickly snatched up by young Democrats and law school students. Well, this prep phrase is considered long enough by the grammar gods that it would take a comma. Now the question is, what do you mean by long enough? I don't know. Sometimes the grammar gods just simply make up rules and we just kind of have to follow them. And I don't know what they define as long enough. I usually say if it's 3 words, 4 words, I don't put a comma in. As soon as it ventures into 5 words, I usually put a comma in. It's kind of a really lame old school grammar rule that we have, and I don't know why we have it, but we just do. So therefore, this is a long enough prep phrase. It's got 5 words. Comma makes a good choice. Another option we might have is a string of prep phrases, like after the attack of the school by the angry pygmy goats, comma, we stood in awe of the smoldering wreckage and overturned ping pong tables. In this case, we have a string of prep phrases. Sure, they're short prep phrases, but if I have a string of them in a row, I wait to the very last one and then I put the comma in. So once again, this just has to apply with when it starts the sentence. Rule number 2, when the end of the adverbial slot is not readily apparent, the comma will be needed to prevent misreading, which basically means if you can't tell where the adverb ends and the rest of the sentence continues, better put a comma in, just for clarity. I'm not a huge fan of this rule, but I understand its purpose. If I said, after high school, students often find college to be both challenging and liberating. Well, I understand the prep phrase is after high school, but you could misread it as after high school students. You're like, wait a minute, it's not high school students, it's after high school students often find college. I realize that students doesn't go with high school, but you could misread it as high school students because there is such a thing as a high school student. So for that reason, you'll notice that I put a comma after the word school. And that is nothing more than just simply for clarity. It's not really a grammatical reason. It's just to make sure that things are clear. I might even sneeze. I don't know. I can feel one brewing. There it was. Excuse me. Number 3. When the adverbial phrase is parenthetical, or more clearly, it's a comment on the whole sentence, than rather a straightforward adverbial, then we also use a comma. This is a really important rule. I want you to put a star next to rule number 3. We're going to use this one twice, both in this unit and a later unit. So if I said, the book you want is out of print, unfortunately, well, unfortunately is just an adverb. It doesn't really matter where it's placed, whether, I didn't really highlight the whole thing there, did I? It doesn't really matter if the adverb is at the, I can't fix this thing, stop it. It doesn't really matter if the adverb is at the beginning of the sentence or at the end of the sentence or the middle of the sentence. This guy is the kind of adverb that gets a comma. Because what's happening is it's not describing the verb. It's really describing about the whole sentence. The whole sentence is unfortunate. So it's unfortunate that the book you want is out of print. If I said clearly, Luke needs to be more open to the awesomeness of Twinkies. Well, clearly isn't describing the word needs. It's not he clearly needs, but what really is saying is like clearly, as in obviously. It's apparent. Apparently, Luke needs to be more open to the awesomeness of Twinkies. There are only certain adverbs that take commas, and they're usually like weird adverbs like unfortunately, or luckily, or ironically, where the sentence is lucky, or the sentence is ironic, the sentence is fortunate, not the actual verb. If you think about what we showed in rule number 1, hastily just described the verb, tells us how we gathered. We gathered hastily. We left the room hastily. But here, the whole sentence is unfortunate. Here, it's clear, it's obvious, this whole sentence. And that's what makes those different. Be careful of rule number 3. Rule number 4, when the adverbial interrupts the verb phrase for a special effect, we put commas on either side of it. So if I said, I finally bought myself for my birthday a shiny new donkey. Well, you're kind of interrupting the flow of the sentence, so you can put commas on either side of it. Or you could say, he asked me, quite candidly, about my change in Facebook status. Now, there are other ways of actually interrupting the flow of a sentence other than putting commas on both sides. And so we're going to find later that a dash is a much better choice. But for now, commas are okay. Just remember, if you're going to put in one, you have to put in the other one. The SAT likes this one. I don't particularly care for this rule, but the SAT does. So therefore, I guess we should too. Rule number 5, an introductory adverbial infinitive and an introductory adverbial clause always are set off with commas. It doesn't matter how long or short they are. And that can be confusing because rule number 1 is about a prep phrase and its length. But if it's a clause or if it's an infinitive phrase, regardless of how long or short it is, it always gets a comma. So if I said, in order to guarantee an A in Mrs. Wade's class, comma, Eric resorted to flagrant schmoozing and bribery. Well, the infinitive starts the sentence as an adverbial infinitive and therefore gets a comma. If I said, because students hated their other choices, comma, they sign up for advanced grammar through default. So the adverbial clause always gets the comma if it starts the sentence. The adverbial infinitive always gets a comma if it starts the sentence. Remember, it's adverbial infinitive. So therefore, if I throw in a nominal infinitive from our last unit, be careful, because I'll do that to you. And those don't get commas. Lastly, rule number 6. We always separate what we call a conjunctive adverb, which sometimes people have been taught mean transitional words. We always separate those with commas. So if I say, however, comma, your smell is bordering on repulsive. Transitional words, or what are really called conjunctive adverbs, always get separated with commas. So moreover, nevertheless, therefore, furthermore, always get separated with commas.